वेलकम टू TOF। आई एम दिव्यांशी और इस वीडियो में हम कवर करेंगे आज के न्यूज़पेपर में जो इम्पोर्टेंट आर्टिकल्स आए हैं। सो विल टॉक अबाउट देम। सो पहला आर्टिकल जो हम कवर कर रहे हैं दैट इज़ अ वाइडनिंग वॉर। सो दिस आर्टिकल इज़ अबाउट इजराइल हमास वॉर, राइट, द कॉन्फ्लिक्ट इन द मिडल ईस्ट रीजन and how it has spillover effect in the entire Middle East. So I have recently covered a video on Israel-Hamas war, right? So where I have talked about what is Hamas, what is Hezbollah, right, and what is the issue. Recently, Israel has assassinated 3 top leaders from Hamas and Hezbollah, right, and that has led to retaliation from Iran. So and also escalated the issue. So this is this article about. So in the Middle East, current round of bloodletting without pause is exposing the frailty of every player. So this article is talking about that whenever a war happens, what happens? The parties that are involved in the war, their vulnerabilities that are also exposed. So here it is talking about the vulnerabilities of Iran is exposed, that it was not able to prevent the Israel-led assassination of one of the leaders, right, of Hamas that was present in their state. They could not prevent that. At the same time, it is also exposing the vulnerabilities of Israel, where 60% of families in Israel, they have their members serving in war. There are relocation of people and families because of the increasing conflict in the region. So Israel is also paying a high domestic price for that, right? So here this article is saying that the back-to-back assassination of 3 top leaders of Iran's proxy forces in Middle East, 2 of Hamas and 1 of Hezbollah, that is pushing the Middle East into a wider war, right? So यहाँ पर Iran is promising that it will retaliate against Israel. And now what? Israel is said to be the 51st state of America. So obviously America is concerned and it is moving more forces, more additional military forces into the region. And now the impact of war is what? The oil prices will begin to rise, as we have seen that we know that Iran is a major oil supplier. So one of the impact would be that the oil prices would rise. Whenever war happens, oil prices rises, right? And it has debilitating impact, like we have seen in Russia-Ukraine war, the brunt of which had to suffer by other countries also. So here what it is saying that more than 9 months after a Hamas terror attack on Israel. Now we have already discussed it in the previous video that in October there was this surprise attack by Hamas on Israel. The Israelis, they were celebrating some event, and on that event there was a surprise attack by Hamas in which several Israelis were killed. Some of them were taken as hostage, and to avenge that, what happened? Israel retaliated and continued its campaign of retribution that has killed thousands in Gaza. And now we are seeing that there is no pause to this conflict from both the sides. There is bloodletting in the Middle East, right? And now Iran backed rebels, they have also attacked US bases in Iraq, and the US forces are expecting more such attacks to happen. So now here it is saying that what is the outcome? The article is saying that what is the outcome of all this conflict, of this renewed conflict? There is no such great outcome that is coming out of this situation, right? Here the article is saying that history of warfare tells us that whenever such large scale violence happens, the equation changes in the region, right? There are some structural rearrangements, some structural changes that happen, right? And in Middle East also we have seen such structural changes to happen when war has happened in the history. But now in this case, in this situation of Israel-Hamas conflict, right, Israel had campaigned to end Hamas in Gaza, right? And because of which it is doing several assassination, it has gone violent. But many in Israel and across the world are suggesting that Israel is nowhere achieving this political objectives, right? And Israel is paying heavy price of it, of these hostilities, that about 60% of the families in Israel have to serve in the war, right? So we know that it's a small country with small population, so they have to do this mass mobilization to wage this war. So the brunt is borne socially, right? So the social burden of massive war mobilization in a small country is compounded by the fact that 1 out of 5 families, they have to relocate, right, because of the threat, because of the conflict situation, right? And it has deeply divided the society. So this is the result, and this war has exposed the vulnerabilities of Israel, right? Then same is true for Iran, that Iran was not able to prevent the assassination of Hamas leader, right? Israel on the defensive, it has been impressive. It is success. We have seen that it is nurturing Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, right? So that they can wage a war against Israelis. So these are the proxy forces that are being supported by Iran, right? But yet Iran was also exposed, where they could not protect the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, who was visiting as a state guest, right? So that points that Iran's security structure has loopholes, because of which they could not prevent such assassination. So in the Middle East, that the conflict that is going on can have debilitating impact, and the violent situation is not stopping in the region. So here it is saying that some Arabs see Iranian proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, they as a bigger existential threat than Israel, right? So this region is deeply divided, and because of the Israel-Iran issue and Israel-Hamas war, the situation has further been complicated. So this is what this article talks about. We'll talk about is bullied in Paris. So this is regarding the gender testing or the sex testing at Olympics that happens, right, to identify whether a player belongs to the gender binary or not, as male or female, right? So this they do based on various tests like chromosome tests, or there are several tests, and the tests have evolved through time. So there are 2 articles in today's newspaper. One is the illogic of binary. So this article talks about that how with time Olympics had introduced compulsory chromosome testing for female athletes, right? And then how these tests have evolved, how they have become sophisticated, and how it has actually uh, been illogical to see the sexes in binary, as there are several variations. Studies have proven that there are several variations between the binary itself, right? And how this sort of practice leads to discrimination and can have a debilitating impact on the psychology, on the mental health of the person who is participating, right? So here what has the case is that the article says every person, irrespective of their gender identity or sex variation, has the right to practice a sport without discrimination and in a way that respects their health, safety, and dignity, right? Yet, on all these accounts, Algerian boxer Imin Khalif as well as Taiwan's Lin Yuting, they have been repeatedly let down at Paris Olympics, right? Where their opponents, they even refused to do the courtesy post-match handshake with them, and even the global leaders like former US President J.K. Rowling, like famous writer, or the entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, dismissing their victory. And the reason being cited is that Khalif had failed to pass the gender test, which was conducted by the now de-recognized International Boxing Association last year, details of which were not made public, right? And because neither conforms to the traditional imagination of a female athlete, right? So she is like the article is saying that because of her appearance, that she does not that she does not look that feminine. All of this actually questions whether we are achieving equality in sports or not, right? So this type of examples you can use in your essay paper, you can use it in your GS4 ethics paper. You can also talk about in your GS2 vulnerable section wale topic mein, and the society part GS1. So in some of the previous videos I have covered one article called dignity denied. So there you can use such examples, right? So this article and this article talks about that only, that in Olympics earlier what used to happen was that sports had a long and disturbing history of sex testing, beginning with what are known as the nude parades, being made to walk naked before a panel of doctors, right? And only women were subjected to such kind of sex testing in sport, because the anxiety is that men will sneak into women's competition and they will win medals, right? And whereas for the opposite case, this anxiety is not there, because female are considered to be not that strong compared to men, and so they cannot compete with them there, right? And women are seen as far less strong than men, so they are considered the weaker sex. But over time we have seen that the nude parades were replaced with more sophisticated tests. One of them was being chromosome testing, and now we also have this sex determining region Y chromosome test, or SRI, right? So this these examples you can use in your ethics paper. And here it says that, so the boxer who has been subjected to such criticism, she has appealed that these kind of bullying can kill people's thoughts, spirit and mind, and this goes against every notion of fair play and sporting spirit, right? So you can use it. The next article that we will talk about is the Rawalpindi factor by C. Raja Mohan, right? So this article talks about that while India engaging with Pakistan, should Kashmir issue, is it irrelevant at present time or is it still there? That's the question. And how is India, how does India has to take it while dealing with Pakistan, right? And while dealing with the Kashmir issue, India cannot afford any complacency on the Kashmir issue, right? So this article talks about that the Pakistan's effort to internationalize the Kashmir issue. Now, because of Delhi's effort, because of India's effort, these ambitions of Pakistan could not fructify, but still Delhi cannot be complicit, right? So here it is saying that the constitutional change that we did in 2019, where we abrogated Article 370, right, rendered the issue irrelevant to the engagement between India and Pakistan. The answer is both yes and no, right? So India ended the ambiguous relation of Jammu and Kashmir with respect to India, right, by abrogating this article. The Delhi has buried the idea that its internal status is open-ended and negotiable. Now we have seen that India has good relations with West, right? And it has helped blunt efforts by Pakistan and China to internationalize the Kashmir issue. But what we have seen that we cannot ignore it entirely, because recently we have seen that cross-border terrorism has been rising, particularly in Jammu, right? So we cannot be complacent. There is no room for complacency, right, with respect to the Kashmir issue. So the article says that Delhi can take credit for significantly reducing the global salience of the Kashmir question, where Delhi was able to not let Pakistan internationalize the issue, right? Since Delhi decided to take the issue to United Nations in 1948, so that cost had to be paid by India, right? And then it has talked about how the issue has historically evolved, right? And how Pakistan was able to internationalize the issue, particularly in late 1980s, right? And what happened during the Cold War era. The global environment after Cold War era was in favor of human rights and the political devaluation of state sovereignty. It gave Pakistan a powerful dual strategy. So what Pakistan did was it supported insurgency, right? It supported militancy in Kashmir, and at the same time it demanded that there should be some international intervention in Kashmir so that human rights could be restored, right? And it always pressured India to come to some settlement which is favorable for Pakistan, right? At the same time, they were doing what? Their military was at all the time triggering cross-border terrorism, right? That actually led to internationalizing the Kashmir issue, and the cross-border terrorism and everything raised to such a high level that the matter escalated to the nuclear level, where both Delhi and Pakistan were armed with atomic weapons, right? So that in turn actually led to global concerns of nuclear proliferation, right? And it internationalized the issue, where Kashmir became the world's most dangerous nuclear flashpoint, right? The issue which could even trigger nuclear war, right? But then India had overcome all these difficulties, right? Thanks to our steady economic growth, and then our relations with the West improved, right? Particularly with US in the 2000s, where George Bush administration put an end to the Washington's Kashmir activism, right? And also found a way to resolve the nuclear dispute between the countries, between US and India. We know that there was 2008 nuclear deal that happened between India and US. So the problem of dealing with Pakistan cross-border terrorism and its capacity to create political trouble in Kashmir, that has remained, right? But since the NDA government has came to power, जो NDA government की strategy रही है, that is to renegotiate the terms of engagement with Pakistan. We will engage with Pakistan on our own terms, right? Not on the terms being dictated by Pakistan. That was the strategy of NDA government, right? And this involved that we would create military deterrence along the borders. We would, so that we don't we are not tolerating cross-border terrorism at all, right? End the engagement. The NDA government, इनकी strategy थी that they will end the engagement with militant groups in Kashmir, and insistence that talks and terrors cannot go together, right? So Pakistan has to stop promoting the militant groups and talking about peace in the region, right? So changing the constitutional status quo in Kashmir in 2019 was masterpiece of this strategy, right? So what happened after abrogation of Article 370? Pakistan, it turned to China so that they can internationalize the issue, and they wanted to put the Kashmir question on UNSC agenda, right? But India blocked this move with the help of US, France, and some of the partners in Middle East, UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc. So Pakistan could not make it a big issue. So now this article is saying, even though we are able to prevent this matter, internationalization of this issue, still we cannot be complacent while dealing with Pakistan. We cannot be complacent with respect to Kashmir. So this article is suggesting some of the way forward, right? And this you can hear that India was able to block the Pakistan move to internationalize the Kashmir issue after 2019. This you can use as an example of successful diplomacy of India. Successful diplomacy of India, right? So this you can use as example. And here the article is suggesting that although India had a relatively easier time dealing with Pakistan since August 19, Delhi should not assume that it can ignore Pakistan, right? Or the Kashmir question is no longer relevant. The Pakistan army may be down, but it is certainly not out, right? So renewed political trouble in Kashmir will inevitably draw international attention, right? So we need to make efforts to reconcile the Kashmir region internally, right? Countering the renewed cross-border terrorism, creating a strong deterrence, right? And connecting with the diverse elements of Pakistan polity. That should be the top elements in our national security priorities, right? So this is what this article is talking about. Next article is about the green energy transition. Real politics can be green. It can be a challenge for our leaders to find a balance between sustainability and demands for national security and economic growth. So this is an article by Vikram S. Mehta. Now here the article is saying that reflecting on India's green energy transition, there three thoughts come to mind, right? सबसे पहला है कि इंडिया में there is not a uniform national transition, right? There are several states led transitions also. Some states are doing good, some states are laggard in this regard with respect to energy transition. So आप as a holistic नहीं देख सकते हो. इंडिया में आपको uniform national transition नहीं मिलेगा. There are several state led transitions also. So one is that concern. Second is that there is tension between the drivers of this transition and our trade policy, right? So trade policy, we have seen that there are issues with respect to trade policies as well. We'll see as we move along. So third is that there is an imbalance between the real politic of governance and the ethical imperative of sustainable development. So here the article is saying that the green energy transition is predominantly about green electrification, right? So the pace, scope and size of the shift from fossil fuels depend upon the electrification of transport, industry, buildings and residential areas, right? And here the article also says that electricity generation, transmission and distribution is a concurrent subject. The design and effectiveness of green energy transition is joint responsibility of center and states. So the first point that we discussed is that there is no uniform national transition. So if we want a successful transition, right, towards electrification from fossil fuels to clean energy, we need efforts by both center and state, and that has to be joint efforts. That has to be collective efforts. So here, this is a good example. You can use it in your GS2 environmental governance wale part mein, right? Or in good governance example, right? Where there is more effective coordination between different organizations, different ministries to come up with a successful example of transition, right? So the Union Ministry of New and Renewable Energy has made impressive progress. There is a roadmap of 50% of India's energy requirement will be met from renewables by 2030, right? Objective क्या है कि हम 500 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity install करें by 2030, right? And Ministry of New and Renewable Energy is committed to bid out 50 gigawatt of solar power generation capacity every year, right? And they exceeded their target in 2023 by almost 25%. So how they were able to do that? The more significant perhaps is that the silos, the segregation in the functioning of different government ministries, that has been reduced, right? MNRE along with Ministry of Power and several regulatory agencies like Central Electricity Authority, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, etc. and POSCO, Power System Operating Corporation Limited, they are working in harmony. So you can use it as an example in your GS paper too, right? So more of course needs to be done. Transmission connectivity is still inadequate, right? We need to scale up that. We need to scale up the grid storage as well, right? So that is still a challenge. We have to make it more cost effective, right? And the right technology has to come in. But still we see that green finance is a challenge, right? Green finance is a challenge because generally the finance that comes for the green energy transition is like short term, right? They eye it for 6 to 7 years. Whoever are the investors, they are looking for a profitable exit within 6 to 7 years, whereas what is required is 25-year time horizon because it's a long gestation period projects. So we need green finance, right? So on a balance though, central government deserves credit for going beyond its capacities, right? But still a lot has to be done. Then this article talks about that there are certain states which are front runners, but then there are laggards. So we have to deal with that. Like states, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Odisha and Delhi, they have moved further and faster because of conducive policy environment, demographics, right? whereas states like Haryana, they have good policies, political end pe they have policies, but then they have failed because they did not have a proper machinery for implementation. And then there are states like Rajasthan who are not financially capable, they are financially stretched, right, to provide incentives so that they can allow this transition away from fossil fuels, right? So this is one thing, and the fact is that there is no uniformity in the pattern of clean energy transition across the states. That is what they are saying कि हर कोई अपनी अपनी speed के हिसाब से चल रहा है, given their own policy environment, given their own financial condition, right, and given their own way of implementing the policies, they are working at different pace. And what we have to do is that bring all of them together, right? Eventually, though, given that this transition does not respect political and institutional boundaries, all the entities, central government, state government, public sector, private sector companies, consumers and generators, all have to align so that we can actually achieve this transition, right? And then the point that the article initially talked about, that the trade policy. So trade policy should serve national interests, right? This is beyond debate. But then kitna national interest serve karna hai, that is a question, right? In the context of energy transition, this surfaces as a policy dilemma, right? And how it is a policy dilemma, because we have seen China as a security threat, right? Over dependence on China is a threat to our strategic autonomy. But at the same time, according to International Energy Agency, in 2023, it reported that China accounted for 63% of incremental global addition in renewables, right? And it has abundance of components in solar and wind value chain, right? And at the same time, they are cost effective. There was this report, right, that Chinese solar panels are 85% cheaper than US panels and 55% cheaper than those made in Southeast Asia, and they are of world class quality, right? So now the trade policy should be that we can outsource it from them, we can get it from them, but then our national interests would be subserved because we have certain security issues with China, right? The fact is, were Indian manufacturers allowed unconstrained access to cheap Chinese products, the competitiveness gap between clean energy and fossil fuels would narrow down because cost कम हो जाएगी. So obviously clean energy would be a better option. But then geopolitically it's an unrealistic proposition because India cannot expose itself. India cannot be vulnerable in front of China by being over dependent on China for such a crucial thing. Energy security is very crucial for a country to grow economically and to develop its hard power. So we cannot put our strategic autonomy at stake by relying on China, right? So that is the dilemma. So the challenge for our leaders is to find a balance between the compulsion of sustainability and the demands of national security and economic growth. So what we have to do is that we have to bring our climate policies and our trade policies at sync, right? So this is what this article talks about. Then it talks about ethical conundrum where the global warming is a fact, right? Every now and then we see that the issue of floods, urban floods, then landslides. We have seen landslides in Wayanad. Recently, an article had come in newspaper regarding low temperature. This is increasing and it had affected the air traffic in the region, right, where the flights were delayed. So what happens is that when a flight takes off, suppose this is a aircraft, these are its wing. So what happens is that when the aircraft takes off, above its wing low pressure conditions are generated and below its wing high pressure conditions are generated, which actually help in the lift of the aircraft. But because of increasing temperature, what has happened, this high temperature is not able to be so strong, right? It is relatively lower, which is affecting the lift, right? And to overcome this, what happens is that airports have long runway to compensate this. But in high altitude, you cannot have those long runways because land is a scarcity over there. So this actually had led to delaying of flights in the region, right? So these kind of catchy examples you can use in your answers will fetch you extra marks, because this is something that people would not write, that how it is impacting the air traffic, right? So you can use these kind of examples in your answer, right? So here the article is saying that global warming is a reality, nobody can ignore it, right? And and the economic and human cost of climate change, they are palpable. So we should think it from a broad angle, right? It should be one that sets the dynamics of narrow realpolitik within the broader frame of humanity, ethics, and cooperative governance. So this article was about energy transition. So this was it for this video. Thank you.